The day had been long, but nothing compared to the night that was about to unfold. Armand Hale, a single father of a 6-year-old boy named Rafe, had just collapsed onto the torn sofa in his small living room when he heard the sudden hard knock on his door. It wasn't the kind of knock that belonged to a neighbor asking for sugar or a delivery boy confused in the dark. It was the kind of knock that made the heart skip, the breath halt, and the worst possibilities flash through the mind. His hands trembled because he had only heard such firmness from one person, his boss, Marcel Rowan, a man known for his unbreakable composure and almost intimidating presence. Armand froze, exhausted, broken inside, wondering why in the world his boss would show up at midnight like this. Little did he know that this night would change everything he believed about kindness, pain, responsibility, and the unexpected ways fate steps in when a person is at their weakest. If you believe in second chances, compassion, and the power of kindness, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel Stories of Kindness. Your support helps bring real emotions to life. That evening, hours before the midnight knock, had been nothing short of suffocating for Armand. The heat of the day lingered, in the cramped apartment he could barely afford, a place where the windows stuck half open, and the old fan rattled like it was tired of existing. Rafe, whose smile had always been Armand's source of strength, had been coughing heavily through most of the afternoon. The medicine prescribed last month had run out 2 days ago, and although Armand had promised his son he would buy more, the truth was he simply didn't have the money. Working at the freight warehouse under Marcel had given him enough to keep the lights on and some meals on the table. But medical bills were a different world. Armand had tried so hard to hide how cornered he was, but children always sense things. Rafe had asked if everything was okay, but Armand had brushed it off with a small smile and a gentle squeeze of his shoulder, telling him everything would be fine. Yet deep inside, Armand felt like he was rapidly sinking, his job performance slipping due to lack of sleep, his bills stacking unevenly on the kitchen counter, and his hopes shrinking day by day. When Rafe finally fell asleep early, curled in a blanket that had become too small for him, Armand stared at his boy's tiny frame and realized just how fragile life had become. He had once dreamed of giving his son a childhood filled with adventures, parks, and laughter. But these days their biggest adventure was stretching groceries to last a week. He sat on the sofa and buried his face in his hands, feeling a painful heaviness in his chest, the kind that grows when a parent fears they're failing their child. He wanted to cry, but tears refused to fall, as if his body had learned that even emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford. All of this led to the midnight knock, the one that made his heart leap into panic. He opened the door cautiously, and there stood Marcel Rowan, tall, sharply dressed even at that hour, his eyes observing the dim apartment behind Armand. The hallway light cast a soft glow on his expression, revealing something unusual: concern. Armand didn't understand how or why his boss was there. He immediately thought he was being fired. Maybe the inventory mistake earlier that day had cost him his job, but Marcel's expression didn't seem cold enough for that. Instead, there was a question hovering in the air around him, an unspoken weight that made Armand stand straighter despite his fear. The day before, Armand had accidentally muttered under his breath that he might not be able to continue working overtime because of his son's health. He hadn't meant to say it aloud, especially not near Marcel, who maintained strict professionalism. And yet, maybe Marcel had heard it. Maybe that was why he was here. Armand stepped aside to let him in, embarrassed by the state of his home, by the worn couch, the cracked tiles, the flickering kitchen light, but Marcel didn't seem bothered. Instead, his gaze landed on the bedroom door, where a soft cough echoed from inside. Armand's shoulders tensed, and he hastily explained that his son had been ill, that the cough was nothing serious, that everything was under control. Marcel listened in silence, and when Armand finished, he simply looked at him more deeply than he ever had before, as though trying to understand the truth hidden behind his careful words. But Armand didn't dare admit the full truth, that he couldn't afford the medicine, that the bills were overdue, that he'd been too ashamed to ask for help. He murmured something about managing, about getting through it like he always did, and Marcel suddenly said, in a voice that held an unusual softness, "Say that again, but look at me." Armin paused, stunned, because no one had ever asked him to look them in the eye while explaining his struggles. He lifted his gaze, hesitant, tired, and vulnerable, and in that moment, something surprising happened. Marcel saw the exhaustion that Armin had been hiding for months. He saw the silent desperation of a man trying to be strong for his child. And without Armin needing to say any more, Marcel understood everything. He didn't scold him or criticize him. Instead, his expression shifted to one of resolve and empathy, a look Armin never thought he'd see from his strict boss. What followed was unexpected. Marcel stepped closer, lowering his voice as though respecting the quiet of the night and the sleeping child in the next room. He told Armin that he had noticed a change in his performance at work, not as a complaint, but as an observation from someone who wanted to help instead of punish. He explained that he had grown up in poverty himself, raised by a mother who worked 3 jobs, and he remembered what it felt like to hide hardships. He had recognized the same kind of silent struggle in Armin, and chose not to look away this time. Marcel said that he couldn't ignore the signs anymore, not when he cared about his employees' well-being. The words stunned Armin, because Marcel had never been anything but distant and professional. But here he was, standing in Armin's living room, offering compassion when Armin had least expected it. Marcel asked permission before stepping into Rafe's room. When he saw the frail little boy curled up with a reddish face and labored breathing, something softened in his expression. He told Armin that he knew a pediatrician who owed him a favor and insisted they take Rafe first thing in the morning for treatment, assuring him the costs would be covered. Armin's throat tightened so sharply he had to turn away. No one had helped him like this since his wife Zara passed away during childbirth. Since then, life had been a long, lonely climb, and kindness had become something he rarely encountered. Now, standing there with someone offering support, his emotions felt too large for his chest. The next day, Marcel personally drove them to the clinic. The doctor diagnosed Rafe with severe bronchitis that needed immediate medication and rest. If left untreated longer, it could have worsened significantly. Hearing this shook Armin to his core. He realized how close he had been to failing his child without meaning to. While Rafe rested at the clinic, Marcel quietly settled the bills, even arranging for a month-long supply of necessary medicine. Armin tried to protest, but Marcel simply placed a hand on his shoulder, reminding him that accepting help wasn't weakness but love for his son. Over the next few days, Marcel kept checking on them. He sent groceries to their home, got Rafe new blankets, and even helped fix the stuck window so fresh air could flow again. He did all of this without expectation, without seeking praise, simply because he genuinely cared. Gradually, Armin began feeling something he hadn't felt in years: relief. For once, he wasn't fighting alone. For once, someone saw him, not as an employee, not as a burden, but as a father doing his best. As Rafe recovered and began smiling again, Armin's world brightened. He returned to work with clearer focus, lighter shoulders, and gratitude that showed in his improved performance. Marcel noticed, but never mentioned his role in it, choosing instead to praise Armin for his dedication. Their dynamic shifted from distant worker and boss to 2 men who had learned to trust each other through hardship. Weeks later, on a sunny afternoon at the warehouse, Armin watched Rafe running around with newfound energy, holding a small toy truck Marcel had gifted him. The sight filled Armin with a warmth he thought he had lost forever. He realized that sometimes life doesn't change through miracles. It changes through people who choose to show up when you least expect it. And sometimes those people arrive not as heroes in capes, but as bosses knocking at midnight with concern in their eyes. As the story of Armand's struggle and Marcel's kindness reminds us, life has a way of giving second chances through others, often at the moment we feel most hopeless. If this story touched your heart even a little, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. Your support keeps these emotional journeys alive for others who may need them. Special request: please comment, kindness lives on, if you believe that even small acts of compassion can change someone's entire world. And so, Armand's life began to heal, slowly, steadily, beautifully, because one man chose empathy over judgment, and one father finally allowed himself to accept help.